The sound of applause still resounded in Taylor Swift's ears as she walked the streets of Nashville. It was strange how, even after so many years, that sound never lost its magic. Still, there were days when she longed for anonymity, for the simplicity that seemed so far removed from her spotlight-filled reality. On that fall morning, Taylor had decided to do something different. Dressed in an oversized sweater, faded jeans and discreet sunglasses, she walked into the small coffee shop Melody's Place, a cozy and unpretentious establishment in the center of the city. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and cinnamon enveloped her senses as soon as the door closed behind her. The cafeteria was busy but not crowded. A few people glanced in her direction as she entered, a brief moment of recognition flashing past their faces before they returned to their conversations. That was the beauty of places like Melody's. People respected each other's space, celebrities or not. "A big American with a touch of cinnamon, please," Taylor urged, her voice soft as she approached the counter. The barista, a young man with curly hair and a warm smile, nodded. "Name for the order?" he asked, pen in hand. "Taylor," she replied with a discreet smile. The young man paused for a moment, his eyes widening slightly before recovering professionally. "Okay, Taylor. It will be ready in a few minutes." As she waited, Taylor chose a table in the corner of the coffee shop, near the window that overlooked the street. From there, he could watch the movement of the city, people walking in a hurry, others strolling quietly, all absorbed in their own stories. It was something she always cherished, imagining the lives behind the anonymous faces, the struggles, the dreams, the small everyday victories. His coffee arrived, brought by the same barista, who now seemed slightly nervous. "Here's your request, and, well, I just wanted to say that I'm a big fan," he commented, keeping his voice low. "Your last album helped me get through a difficult time." Taylor smiled genuinely. "It means a lot to me, thank you for sharing." The young man nodded, visibly moved, and returned to work. Taylor took a sip of the coffee, letting the warmth of the drink warm his body. There was something deeply comforting about those small moments of human connection, reminders of why she made music, of the impact her words could have. The cafeteria was full of life, the murmur of conversations, the clinking of cups, the occasional laughter that stood out in the ambient melody. Taylor pulled a small notebook out of her bag and began to write down some ideas for lyrics that had been floating around in her mind. Words always came more easily in places like this, where real life happened without filters or rehearsals. It was then that she noticed, in the midst of the noise and movement, something caught his attention. A girl, no more than 7 years old, was sitting a few tables away, accompanied by a well-dressed man. What caught Taylor's eye was not the child itself, but something in his posture: tense shoulders, restless eyes, nervous fingers clinging to a doll worn out by time and use. There was something wrong with that scene. The contrast between the man's impeccable appearance and the girl's simple, slightly faded dress. The way she seemed to shrink whenever he moved. The way his eyes wandered around the coffee shop, as if looking for something or someone. Taylor tried to turn her attention to the notebook, but she couldn't ignore that nagging sensation growing in her chest. Years of intuition had taught her to trust her instincts, and at that moment, they were all telling her that something wasn't right. The man stood up abruptly, mumbling something to the girl before heading to the bathroom. It was in that brief moment that the child's eyes met Taylor's. A gaze that carried fear, hope, and a silent plea that transcended words. Without a second thought, Taylor closed her notebook. This was not a time to observe from a distance. Something inside her told her that she needed to act, even without knowing exactly what was happening. Sometimes life puts us at crossroads, where the choice is not between right and wrong, but between acting or pretending we didn't see. And Taylor Swift has never been one to look away. Taylor hesitated only for a moment. Years in the spotlight had developed in her a mixture of caution and determination. She knew that her actions were always amplified, for better or for worse. But there were times when what mattered was not being Taylor Swift, the celebrity, but simply being human. With deliberately casual steps, she approached the table where the girl was sitting. The child watched her with wide eyes, a mixture of recognition and apprehension on her delicate face. "Hi," Taylor greeted with a gentle smile, bending down slightly to be at the girl's height. "That's a very beautiful doll you have there." The girl pressed the doll to her chest, her small fingers gripping the toy tightly. For a moment, Taylor thought she wouldn't answer, but then a soft voice emerged. "Her name is Star," the child murmured. her eyes still alert, constantly checking the corridor that led to the bathroom. "Star? What a beautiful name," Taylor commented, keeping her voice light, even though her heart was beating fast. "And what's your name?" "Lillian," the girl replied, her eyes finally focusing completely on Taylor. "I know who you are. My mum plays her songs for me before bed." Taylor felt a lump in her throat. "Your mother has good taste," he joked, trying to keep the atmosphere relaxed as he assessed the situation. "Is she here with you today?" Lillian's expression changed instantly, a shadow of sadness and fear passing across her face. She looked down the hall again, and then leaned forward slightly, her voice no more than a whisper. "My mother needs help, but he won't let her." Those words struck Taylor like lightning. Simple, direct, loaded with a despair that no child should know. Before she could answer, Lillian continued, the words gushing out as if she had waited too long for someone to hear them. "He said that if we tell anyone, bad things will happen. But Estrella said you could help. Estrella knows these things." Taylor felt a chill run down her spine. The situation he suspected was real, and now he was facing a decision that could change the child's life. There was no time for hesitation. "Lillian, where is your mother now?" asked Taylor, keeping her voice calm despite the urgency she felt. "At home. She hasn't been able to get out of bed since she fell down the stairs. He said it was an accident, but..." Lillian stopped abruptly, her eyes widening at the sight of something behind Taylor. "What's going on here?" The cold and controlled male voice made Taylor turn around. The man who had been with Lillian was standing, his countenance a mask of warmth that did not reach his eyes. Taylor straightened, his face taking on the composed expression he had perfected after years of dealing with difficult situations under public scrutiny. "Just admiring Lillian's doll," she replied with a polite smile, though her whole body was on alert. "I'm a fan of creative names, and Estrella is really special." The man studied her for a moment, recognition flashing across her face. His posture changed subtly, shoulders less tense, smile wider. Taylor knew that transformation well. It was the effect that fame often had on people. "Taylor Swift, isn't it? What a pleasant surprise," he commented, extending his hand. "Richard Blackwood. I'm a great appreciator of his work." Taylor squeezed his hand briefly, noticing the excessive force in his grip. "Thank you. I always enjoy meeting young fans like Lillian. She would tell me about how you listened to my songs together." It was a risky move, a little lie to gauge his reaction. Richard's eyes hardened momentarily before his smile widened further. "Oh yes, Lillian and her imagination," he replied with a laugh that sounded rehearsed. "In fact, she is the daughter of a friend. I'm taking care of her today while her mother rest. He's been sick lately." His every word confirmed Taylor's suspicions. The story didn't line up with what Lillian had said, and the girl's body language, now withdrawn and silent, told a different story than the one Richard presented. "That's kind of you," Taylor commented, keeping her expression neutral. "It must be hard for Lillian, with her mother sick." "We've been turning around," Richard replied, placing a hand on Lillian's shoulder, who visibly shrank at the touch. "Unfortunately, we need to go now. Commitments, you understand." Taylor realized that he couldn't allow them to just leave. "I needed to buy time, find a way to help without putting Lillian at greater risk." "Actually," she said, thinking quickly, "I'm doing some photos with fans today. It would be a pleasure to include Lillian. I'm sure your mum would love to see that when she's feeling better." The conflict was visible on Richard's face, the opportunity for a photo with a celebrity against the risk of prolonging the interaction. "It would be quick," Taylor insisted, already pulling out his phone. "My assistant can send the photo to you later." As he spoke, his fingers moved discreetly on the screen of the cell phone, typing a message to his security guard, who was waiting outside the coffee shop. 4 words: "Emergency, child in danger." Richard hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "Of course, why not? Lillian would love that, wouldn't she, honey?" The girl nodded silently, her eyes meeting Taylor's with a mixture of fear and hope. It was at that moment that Taylor felt the real weight of the situation. It was no longer a strange interaction in a coffee shop, but a lifetime, possibly 2, depending on your next actions. The call to action could not be clearer, nor more urgent. And as Taylor had learned on her own journey, sometimes the moments that define our lives come disguised as ordinary choices on seemingly normal days. Have you ever wondered what signs of everyday life you might be missing? What silent pleas for help can be in front of your eyes without you realizing it? Share in the comments below a situation where your intuition saved you or helped someone. The atmosphere in the coffee shop had changed. What had once been a haven of normalcy for Taylor had now become the stage for a silent drama, where every word and gesture carried immense weight. As she positioned Lillian for the supposed photo, Taylor kept a smile on her face, casually chatting about music and dreams as she would any young fan. "Do you know what my favorite part of making music is, Lillian?" asked Taylor, gently adjusting the girl's position for the camera, while actually strategically positioning her closer to him and farther away from Richard. Lillian shook her head, her big eyes fixed on Taylor. "It's being able to tell stories. Sometimes happy stories, sometimes sad stories, but always true," Taylor continued, with special meaning in her last words. "And you know what makes a story special? The courage of those who tell it." Lillian's eyes lit up with understanding, and for a brief moment, a small smile appeared on her face. It was like a ray of sunshine on a cloudy day, fleeting but powerful enough to illuminate everything around. Richard watched the interaction with barely concealed impatience, constantly checking his watch. "I think we've taken enough time from Miss Swift," he remarked, holding out his hand to Lillian. "Let's go, we have other commitments." It was at that exact moment that the door to the coffee shop opened, and Taylor's personal security guard Marcus stepped in. Standing 6 feet tall and commanding a respectable presence, he quickly located Taylor and walked toward her with determined steps. "Miss Swift, is everything okay?" he asked, his tone professional but his eyes quickly assessing the situation as Taylor had trained his team to do. "All great, Marcus," Taylor replied matter-of-factly. "I was just getting to know Lillian and her uncle." She left the question in the air, looking at Richard with raised eyebrows. Richard visibly hesitated before answering. "Friend of the family, actually." "Right," Taylor nodded, noting the contradiction with what he had said earlier. "Marcus, I think our schedule has changed a bit. Could you check if we have time for an additional meeting today?" It was a code they had established. Marcus immediately understood that Taylor needed time and perhaps intervention. "Of course," he replied, pulling back slightly and making a call while keeping his eyes on the situation. Tension was growing. Taylor could feel Richard getting more anxious by the second, his fingers drumming on the table, his eyes constantly checking the exits. She needed to keep him there until proper help arrived, without escalating the situation. "Lillian told me about her doll," Taylor commented, turning her attention to the child. "You said her name is Star, right? She looks very special." Lillian nodded, hugging the doll tighter. "Mom made it for me. She sewed stars on the dress because she says we should always look up, even when it's dark." The innocent words carried a depth that made Taylor's heart tighten. How many dark nights had that child faced? How many times had her mother tried to protect her, even when she herself was suffering? "Your mother seems to be a very wise person," Taylor replied softly, trying to convey strength and hope in every word. Richard interrupted sharply. "Enough talk, Lillian, we really need to go." His tone was controlled, but there was an underlying intensity that did not go unnoticed by Taylor or Marcus, who had returned and was standing just a few steps away. "Actually," Taylor interjected, "I was thinking of inviting Lillian to visit my studio. I'm recording some new songs and I always value the input of my younger fans." She smiled at the girl, who looked almost hopeful for the first time. "We could call your mum and check if she agrees. I'm sure she'd like to know you're having a special day." The mention of contacting Lillian's mother made Richard visibly pale. His mask of warmth began to crack, revealing something much darker underneath. "That won't be possible," he replied dryly. "As I mentioned, she is sick and should not be disturbed. Now we really need to go." He grabbed Lillian's arm hard enough to make the girl let out a small gasp of pain. It was enough. Marcus stepped forward, his presence immediately imposing itself between Richard and Lillian. "Sir, I will ask you to release the child," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm seeing marks on your arm that indicate you're holding her with excessive force." Taylor took advantage of the distraction to move closer to Lillian, gently pulling her away from Richard. The girl instinctively pressed herself against her, as if seeking protection. "That's ridiculous," Richard protested, his voice rising. "Who do you think you are to interfere? I'm taking care of her at her mother's request. Then it won't be a problem for us to confirm that with her," Taylor replied firmly. "Lillian told us that her mother needs help and can't get out of bed. Does that sound like someone who would knowingly entrust their daughter to someone else with no means of contact?" Richard looked around, noticing that the scene had attracted the attention of other customers of the coffee shop. His face changed, anger giving way to a forced smile. "I think there was a misunderstanding," he said, lowering his voice. "Lillian has a very active imagination. Your mom just has a cold, and I'm helping as a friend. If it's causing so much inconvenience, we'll just walk away and forget about the incident." But it was too late. Through the door of the coffee shop, 2 uniformed police officers entered, guided by the barista who had previously served Taylor. Marcus had not only alerted Taylor's safety, but also local authorities. What followed was a sequence of events that seemed to occur simultaneously in slow motion and at accelerated speed. The officers approached the situation professionally, separating Richard for questioning, while a female police officer chatted gently with Lillian in a quiet corner of the coffee shop. Taylor remained by Lillian's side throughout the process, offering silent support as the girl, between tears and hesitations, told her story. The truth emerged in painful fragments. His mother, Caroline, had been in an abusive relationship with Richard for nearly 2 years. The fall down the stairs had actually been the result of a violent attack after an attempt by Caroline to leave him. Fearing for her life and that of her daughter, Caroline had submitted, remaining at home while Richard controlled every aspect of their lives. Lillian's opportunity to ask for help came when Richard, confident in his control over the situation, decided to take her to the coffee shop that morning, a rare moment when the girl was out of the house without her constant surveillance. And, as children often do, Lillian found courage where adults see only fear. While the police organized an immediate visit to the residence to check on Caroline's condition and arrange for medical assistance, Taylor sat with Lillian in a quiet corner of the coffee shop, now closed to other customers. "You were very brave today," Taylor said softly, helping Lillian adjust her doll's dress, which had come loose during the confusion. "Do you know what makes a person really strong?" Lillian looked at her with eyes still teary but attentive. "It's not never being afraid," Taylor continued. "It's feeling afraid and still doing what needs to be done, like you did today." "But I was very afraid," Lillian confessed in a low voice. "I still am." "I would be too," Taylor replied honestly. "Fear is just a sign that we care a lot about something. You care about your mother, don't you?" Lillian nodded vigorously. "So your fear makes sense. But look at what you managed to do even though you were afraid. You helped your mother when she needed it most." The girl considered this for a moment, her little fingers tracing the stars sewn onto the doll's dress. "Like in your songs," she said finally. "Mum always says her songs are about being strong even when it hurts." Taylor felt tears forming in her own eyes. It was easy to forget, in the midst of fame and glamour, the true power of music, of human connection, of words that found their way to hearts that needed them. "Your mother is right," Taylor replied, her voice slightly breaking. "And you know what? I think you and your mum have a lot to teach you about being strong." It was a moment of pure connection, not between a superstar and a fan, but between 2 human souls finding comfort and strength in each other. And as they waited for news about Caroline, Taylor realized that of all the audiences she'd sung to, perhaps the most important was this one, a brave little girl holding a worn-out doll in an ordinary coffee shop on a day that had started like any other. Because sometimes the greatest transformations begin in the most unexpected places, with the simplest gestures, an attentive look, an ear willing to listen, and the courage not to look away when life presents its harshest face. 3 hours later, Taylor was sitting in a waiting room at the local hospital, her fingers drumming nervously on her knee as she waited for news. Police had found Caroline in critical condition, dehydrated, with multiple untreated injuries and a possible head injury. She had been immediately transported for medical attention. Lillian was now with a social worker who kindly took her out to eat while the doctors tended to her mother. The separation had been difficult. The girl had clung to Taylor's hand as if she were a lifeguard, her eyes begging not to be left alone again. "I'll be here when you come back," Taylor had promised, bending down to be at the child's eye level. "And as soon as the doctors allow it, we'll see your mum together, okay?" With just that assurance, Lillian had finally agreed to go, her star doll firmly clutched to her chest. Now alone with her thoughts, Taylor tried to process everything that had happened. The day that had begun as a simple break from his hectic routine had turned into something much bigger, a poignant reminder that, behind the carefully constructed facades, stories of pain and struggle often remained hidden. His phone vibrated. It was Rachel, his personal assistant, probably worried about his unscheduled disappearance. "Taylor, is everything okay?" Marcus told me there was some kind of emergency, but he didn't go into details. I'm fine, Taylor replied, realizing how emotionally exhausted she was. But it was intense. I'm at Memorial Hospital. I'll explain everything to you later, but I need you to cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. There was a pause in the line. Rachel knew Taylor well enough to know that she wouldn't ask for it without good reason. Considered done. Need something else? Do you want me to go there? Taylor thought for a moment. Actually, yes. Could you bring some things? Comfortable clothes for a grown woman, medium size, I think, and maybe something for a little girl of 7 years, too. Oh, and that teddy bear I got last week from the charity event. Of course, Rachel replied without question. I'll be there in an hour. Hanging up the phone, Taylor noticed a doctor approaching. She stood up immediately, eager for news. Miss Swift, I'm Dr. Patel. I'm taking care of Caroline Bennett. How is she? Taylor asked, the concern evident in her voice. The doctor indicated the seats and they both sat down. She is stabilized, but the situation is serious. In addition to recent head trauma, we found evidence of multiple previous injuries, some of them not treated properly and poorly healed. It is consistent with a pattern of prolonged abuse. Taylor closed her eyes briefly, the reality of the situation weighing on her. Will she recover? Physically, we believe so, with time and proper care. But the emotional trauma... Dr. Patel left the sentence incomplete, his compassionate gaze expressing what words could not adequately convey. I see, Taylor replied softly. And when will Lillian be able to see her? Caroline is conscious now, although under strong medication. She asked for her daughter immediately upon waking. Dr. Patel smiled slightly. The connection between them seems to be very strong. A brief visit would be possible under supervision. As if by cue, the social worker returned with Lillian, who ran to Taylor as soon as she saw her. Your mom is awake, Taylor told the girl, whose face lit up with hope. The doctor says we can see her for a little while. Moments later, they quietly entered the hospital room. Caroline Bennett looked frail between the white sheets, her face marked by bruises in various stages of healing, a silent testimony to her prolonged suffering. But when her eyes met Lillian, a transformation took place, strength and love radiating through the pain. My love, she whispered, extending a trembling hand. Lillian ran to her mother, careful not to hurt her as she approached the bed. Mom, I did it. I found help, as you taught me. Caroline kissed her daughter's forehead, silent tears streaming down her face. You were so brave, my star. It was then that she noticed Taylor standing respectfully in the distance. Recognition passed through his face, followed by confusion and then a gradual understanding. It was you, she said, her voice hoarse with emotion. You helped my daughter. Taylor approached the bed. In fact, it was Lillian who did all the hard work. She is truly extraordinary. He must have pulled his mother. Caroline held Taylor's hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite her condition. Thank you, it doesn't seem enough. No need to thank you, Taylor replied sincerely. I just did what anyone should do. But both knew it wasn't true. In a world where it was easier to look the other way, where involvement brought complications and inconveniences, Taylor had chosen to get involved. And that choice had altered the course of 2 lives. The visit was brief, as recommended by the doctor. As they left, Lillian looked back at her mother. I'll be back soon, I promise, and I'll bring Estrella to take care of you. Caroline smiled through her tears. You are my brightest star. Remember that. Back in the waiting room, Taylor was faced with another decision. The social worker, a woman named Elena, had approached to discuss the next steps. Normally, in cases like this, we would seek close relatives to temporarily take in the child while the mother recovers, Elena explained. Do you know if Lillian has any other family members in the area? The question was directed to Taylor, who suddenly realized how much she still didn't know about Lillian and Caroline's lives beyond the terrible situation that had connected them. I don't know, she replied honestly, looking at Lillian, who was sitting nearby, absent-mindedly flipping through a children's magazine. Lillian, do you have grandparents or uncles who live near here? The girl looked up, a shadow of worry flashing across her face. Grandma lives very far away. Mom said it's on the other side of the ocean, and Uncle Mike is in heaven. Taylor and Elena exchanged worried looks. Did Caroline mention anything about that? Elena asked. Taylor shook his head. We didn't have a chance to talk much. She looked exhausted. Elena sighed, consulting her notes. We will check the records and try to locate Lillian's grandmother, but this may take time. Meanwhile, she hesitated. clearly uncomfortable with what she needed to say next. "Meanwhile, what?" Taylor asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Lillian will likely need to temporarily stay in an emergency foster home. We have wonderful families certified for situations like this, but with the recent trauma," Taylor felt a knot in her stomach as she imagined Lillian, who had already been through so much, being taken to a completely strange environment, separated from her mother just when they were finally safe. "What if," Taylor began, surprising himself with his own words, "what if there is another option?" It was at that moment that Rachel arrived, carrying the bags Taylor had asked for. She paused, realizing that she had interrupted an important conversation. Taylor gestured for her to come closer. "Rachel, this is Elena, a social worker, and this is Lillian." She smiled at the girl, who was watching Rachel curiously. "Rachel is my assistant, and the person who keeps my life running properly." Rachel smiled, placing the bags on a nearby chair. "I brought everything you asked for," she said, before bending down to greet Lillian. "Hi, Lillian. I heard you had a very special day today." The girl gave a small smile, the first Taylor had seen since they arrived at the hospital. It was like a ray of sunlight breaking through heavy clouds, brief, but unmistakably potent. Taylor took a deep breath. What I was about to propose was impulsive, no doubt, but it also felt profoundly right in a way I couldn't explain. Sometimes life's biggest twists and turns come from the most unexpected moments, a moment of clarity in the midst of chaos. "Elena," she began, carefully choosing her words, "I know this may seem unconventional, but I would like to offer myself as Lillian's temporary guardian while Caroline recovers." The surprise on Elena's face was immediate, as was Rachel's look of shock. Lillian raised her head, her eyes suddenly fixed on Taylor. "Miss Swift," Elena began cautiously, "I understand your concern, and your offer is very generous, but there are procedures, protocols." "I'm completely aware of that," Taylor interrupted softly. "And I am willing to go through all the necessary procedures, background checks, home inspection, you name it. I have resources to ensure that Lillian receives all the care and support she needs, including regular visits to her mother and any therapy that can help her process the trauma." Eleanor seemed to be considering the proposal, though still with evident hesitation. "The system exists to protect children in vulnerable situations. It's not just about financial resources." "I completely agree," Taylor nodded. "And I'm not suggesting that the rules be circumvented for me. I'm asking for permission to begin the official process as any concerned citizen would. The only difference is that in this case, there is already a connection between Lillian and me, a connection that started with trust, which is rare and precious, especially after what she experienced." Rachel, recovered from her initial surprise, stepped forward. "I can assure you that Taylor is extremely responsible and committed. Our team could adjust their schedule to ensure stability during this time, and we have a security system in place that would provide additional protection for Lillian." Lillian, who had been listening intently, finally spoke, her voice small but determined. "I want to be with Taylor. Please. She saved me and Mom, and Estrella likes her." The three adults looked at the girl, each processing her simple but meaning-laden words. There was something powerful about the way Lillian expressed confidence, not as a child dazzled by a celebrity, but as someone who had found safety in the midst of chaos. Elena sighed, a reluctant smile forming on her lips. "We will have to follow all the protocols. There are no shortcuts even for Taylor Swift." "I wouldn't expect anything different," Taylor replied seriously. "And we'll need Caroline's approval, of course." "Absolutely. And there will be home visits, evaluations, interviews?" "I'll be waiting." Elena looked again at her notes, then at Lillian, who hugged her star doll and watched the conversation with hopeful eyes. "I'm going to start the process," she said finally. "But in the meantime, we need a solution for tonight." It was at that moment that a nurse appeared at the door of the waiting room. "Sorry to interrupt, but Caroline Bennett is asking for you, specifically for Taylor Swift." She pronounced the name with a mixture of confusion and admiration. Minutes later, Taylor was again at Caroline's bedside, this time alone. The woman looked a little stronger than before, though still clearly weakened. "Lillian told me what you did," Caroline began, her voice firmer now. "How you realized something was wrong, how you gave her a chance to ask for help. Your daughter is extraordinary," Taylor replied sincerely. "Her courage? It's inspiring." Caroline smiled faintly. "I always tried to teach her to be strong, even when I couldn't be myself." She paused, conflicting emotions running across her face. "For 2 years we lived in fear. Richard controlled everything, our money, our contacts. even the air we breathed. I tried to leave several times, but he always found us. Taylor sat in the chair next to the bed, listening intently as Caroline told fragments of her story, how she had met Richard when she was vulnerable after her brother's death, how her controlling behavior had gradually escalated into physical abuse, how she had tried to protect Lillian as her own spirit broke a little more each day. Yesterday, I tried again, Caroline continued, silent tears streaming down her face. I found a brochure about a women's shelter that Richard hadn't discovered. So I was making plans, gathering some belongings, but he found it, and this time, his voice cracked. Taylor gently held his hand. You don't have to explain. No, Caroline insisted. I want you to understand. After he attacked me, said he was taking Lillian for a walk this morning. The look in his eyes, I feared he might do something terrible, take Lillian away permanently. So even though I could barely move, I told her while he was in the shower to seek help if she had the chance, to find an adult who seemed kind and tell me about me. She let out a weak, incredulous laugh. And of all the people in the world, she found Taylor Swift. My daughter has always had a talent for the dramatic. Taylor smiled, feeling a deep connection to this woman who, despite so much pain, still retained her sense of humor. I think the universe works in mysterious ways. There was a moment of comfortable silence between them before Taylor softly broached the subject that had brought her there. Caroline, the doctors say you'll need time to recover. However, the question arose of where Lillian will stay during this time. Panic immediately dawned on Caroline's eyes. I can't lose her. She's all I have. No one's talking about separating you permanently, Taylor quickly assured. It's only temporary as you get stronger. Elena, the social worker, is looking for relatives, but until she finds it, there's no one, Caroline interrupted, frustration evident in her voice. My mother is in Ireland, too old to travel. My brother passed away. Richard made sure we stayed away from all close friends. Taylor took a deep breath. In fact, I offered to take care of Lillian temporarily. The shock on Caroline's face was expected. You? But why? You don't even know us. Because I saw something in Lillian today. A courage and a light that deserves to be protected. And because perhaps this is the reason why our paths crossed. We can't always explain the whys of life, but we can choose how to respond to them. Caroline studied Taylor's face for a long moment, as if looking for any hint of insincerity or ulterior motives. Finally, she said, "Would you really do that for us?" "Yes," Taylor replied simply, "if you trust me with what is most precious to you." The tears came back to Caroline's eyes, but there was something different about them now. They were not tears of pain or fear, but of relief, maybe even of hope. "Lillian already trusts you," she said finally. "And after today, so will I." It was a twist none of them could have predicted that morning. A superstar, a mother struggling to make ends meet, and a brave little girl, united by chance and choice, facing the unknown together. And as Taylor left the hospital room, she felt the weight and privilege of that trust. There was a long road ahead, legal proceedings, logistical adjustments, the delicate process of helping Lillian feel safe again. But for the first time in a long time, he felt part of something bigger than his music, his fame or his public image. Because sometimes the greatest transformations begin with the smallest gesture, an attentive look, an ear willing to listen, and the courage not to look away when life presents us with its darkest side. And perhaps, Taylor mused as she rejoined Lillian in the waiting room, this was the most important song she would ever write. Not with words or melodies, but with actions and choices that could truly change lives. Have you ever wondered how small choices can lead to big transformations in your life? What seemingly insignificant moment ended up completely changing your path? Share in the comments below how one simple decision transformed your journey. 6 weeks had passed since that fateful day in the coffee shop. Autumn now gave way to the first signs of winter, the air acquiring that characteristic sharpness that seemed to make everything clearer, more defined. In the spacious kitchen of Taylor's home, the aroma of freshly baked cookies filled the room. Lillian was sitting at the counter, concentrating on the task of decorating the star-shaped cookies with shimmering blue icing. His tongue would peek slightly between his teeth as he worked, a sign of his intense concentration. "Be careful not to put too much frosting in one place," Taylor guided gently, adjusting the sleeve of Lillian's blouse that threatened to dip into the bowl of sugar. "Less is more sometimes." "Like in your songs?" asked Lillian, looking up with a mischievous smile. In recent weeks, she had become surprisingly observant about Taylor's creative process, often sitting quietly in the home studio while the artist worked on new compositions. Taylor laughed, running a finger over the girl's cheek to remove a trail of flour. "Just like in my songs. The notes you choose not to play are just as important as the ones you play." The transition had been smoother than either of them could have expected. After a series of evaluations, interviews and checks, Taylor had received temporary approval as Lillian's guardian. Their spacious and safe home, normally a haven of tranquility in their busy life, had become a space of healing and rediscovery for both of them. Caroline was progressing well in her physical recovery, although doctors still recommended an extended period of care before she could fully resume care for Lillian. Meanwhile, she and her daughter communicated daily via video calls and regular hospital visits, which gradually became supervised outings as her condition improved. Richard had been arrested and was awaiting trial on multiple charges. The case had garnered some media attention. It was inevitable considering Taylor's involvement, but her PR team had managed to protect Caroline and Lillian's privacy by focusing only on the aspects that could raise awareness about domestic violence without exploring personal details. "I think this one is ready," Lillian announced, holding up a particularly elaborate cookie. The star was decorated not only with blue icing, but also with small silver details that shimmered in the kitchen light. "It's absolutely perfect," Taylor sincerely praised. "A masterpiece worthy of exhibition. Can we save it for Mom? She's coming tomorrow for lunch." Taylor smiled, feeling a wave of affection for the way Lillian always thought of her mother. "Of course. Let's separate it especially for her." Taylor's phone rang, and she checked it quickly. "It's Rachel, probably about the details of next week's charity." In recent weeks, Taylor had taken a deep dive into the world of organizations that supported survivors of domestic violence. What had begun as a response to Caroline and Lillian's plight had turned into a personal mission. She was organizing a benefit concert with all proceeds going to shelters and support programs. "Hi, Rachel," she answered, putting the phone on speakerphone so she could continue helping Lillian with the cookies. "I'm with my pastry assistant here, so you're on speakerphone." "Hi, Rachel," Lillian greeted happily, now much more at ease with Taylor's team than in the first tense weeks. "Hi, Junior Boss," Rachel replied affectionately. "How are the preparations for tomorrow's big day?" The big day referred not only to Caroline's visit for lunch, but also to the fact that it would be the first time she would spend a few hours alone with Lillian outside of the hospital environment, an important step in her recovery and eventual permanent reunification. "We're making special cookies," Lillian replied seriously, "and I'm going to show Mom my new room. Taylor let me choose the colors, and there are stars on the ceiling that shine when it's dark." "It sounds magical," Rachel commented. "Taylor, I just called to confirm that everything is ready for tomorrow. Lunch will be delivered at noon as planned, and the driver will be available to pick up Caroline at 11:30 a.m. "Perfect, thank you," Taylor replied, exchanging a look of excitement with Lillian. After finishing the call, they finished decorating the cookies in comfortable silence. Taylor realized how precious these simple moments had become to her, a quiet counterpoint to the intensity of her public life, an anchor in reality when the world of fame often seemed ethereal and disconnected. "Taylor?" Lillian's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure, anything." The girl hesitated, her fingers playing with a remaining piece of dough. "When Mom gets better and we move in together again, will you still want to see us?" The question hit Taylor with unexpected force. For the past few weeks, he had struggled to keep expectations clear, explaining to Lillian that the arrangement was temporary, that her mother was working hard to get strong again, that they would eventually build a new life together. But in the process, he had underestimated the bond that was forming, the space Lillian had occupied in his heart. Taylor knelt down to be at the girl's eye level. "Lillian, listen to me carefully. What we have built here is not something that simply disappears when circumstances change. You and your mother will always be important to me." "Promise?" Lillian asked, her eyes seeking reassurance. "I promise. In fact, I've been talking to your mother about something." Taylor paused, considering whether this was the right time to share. "Well, maybe we'd better wait until tomorrow when she's here." "What?" Lillian pleaded, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Tell me, please." Taylor laughed at the girl's anxious expression. "That's okay. I have a property not far from here, a guest house that I haven't used in years. We talked about the possibility of you and your mother living there when she is discharged, at least until you find a place of your own. It would be close enough for us to keep seeing each other regularly, and safe enough for you two to start over. Lillian's eyes lit up with hope. Really? Can we really stay close? If your mother agrees, yes, but it's her decision, you know. We need to respect what she feels is best for both of you. Lillian nodded solemnly, though she couldn't completely contain her enthusiasm. I think she'll like it. She said you're like a guiding star who showed up when we needed it most. Taylor felt a lump in her throat. Well, that's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. Later that night, after putting Lillian to bed, Taylor sat down in the small studio in her home. His fingers slid across the piano keys, finding a melody that had been brewing in his mind for the past few weeks. Something new, different from what he had created before. More mature, perhaps. More anchored in a reality that went beyond love stories and broken hearts. He took his notebook and began to write, the words flowing naturally. Between stars and whispers, I found a truth greater than fame. In the eyes of a child with the courage to ask for help. In the strength of a woman who never stopped trying. It was the beginning of something meaningful, she could feel it. Not just a song, but a testimony. A statement about the kind of person I wanted to be, the kind of impact I wanted to have on the world. The next day, the house was flooded with light and expectation. Lillian had woken up early, insisting on wearing her favorite dress, a gift from Taylor with little stars embroidered on her skirt, and had spent the morning arranging and rearranging the drawings she had made to show her mother. When the doorbell finally rang, she ran to the door, practically jumping with excitement. Caroline stood in the doorway, her appearance remarkably transformed from the past few weeks. The bruises were gone, her hair was well groomed, and there was a renewed glow in her eyes. She still moved with a bit of caution. Some wounds took longer to heal, but there was a dignity to her posture that spoke of regained strength and newfound determination. "Mom!" Lillian exclaimed, throwing herself into her mother's arms, who wrapped her in a tight embrace. "My star," Caroline whispered, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "I missed him so much." Taylor watched the door meet, granting them a private moment before moving closer to greet Caroline. "You look great," she commented sincerely. Caroline smiled, adjusting Lillian on her hip. "I feel like a new person. The doctors say I'm progressing faster than they expected." "It doesn't surprise me at all," Taylor replied. "Are we going in? Lunch should be coming soon, and Lillian is dying to show you some things." The next few hours passed in an atmosphere of quiet celebration. Lillian guided her mother through the temporary room, proudly showing the books she had read, the drawings she had made, the fluorescent stars on the ceiling. Caroline took it all in with genuine interest, asking questions and praising her daughter's progress. During lunch, Taylor mentioned the proposal for the guest house. "There's no pressure at all," she clarified. "It's just an option, if it feels right for you." Caroline considered the offer for a moment. "It's more generosity than we would ever expect. But, Taylor gently encouraged. "But I need to make sure that I'm building a life that I can sustain on my own," Caroline explained. "For Lillian, for me, I'm afraid I depend too much on your goodness." Taylor nodded, deeply respecting that concern. "I completely understand. What do you think of this? The house is available for as long as you need it, without any expectations. In the meantime, we can work together to help you find employment, rebuild your independence. When it's ready to move on, it will be on its own terms." Caroline seemed to consider the proposal. "I worked as a graphic designer before Richard. He made me stop, of course. I said I needed to focus on taking care of the house." "Graphic design?" Taylor smiled. "In fact, my team always needs creative talent for projects. No favoritism. You would have to go through the selection process like anyone else, but it could be a new beginning. A spark of something, hope, perhaps, or determination, flashed in Caroline's eyes. That would be amazing. A real chance, based on what I can do, not my situation." "Exactly," Taylor agreed. "What about the house?" Caroline looked at Lillian, who was watching the conversation with hopeful eyes. "I think we can consider this a temporary restart. A safe place while we rebuild." The joy on Lillian's face was contagious. "Can we have stars on the ceiling there too? And can we plant flowers? And maybe have a puppy?" Caroline laughed, the sound lighter and freer than Taylor had ever heard her. "One thing at a time, honey. First the starry ceiling, then we negotiated the dog." There was something deeply symbolic about that scene. 3 women from different generations, united by extraordinary circumstances, planning a future that neither of them could have imagined weeks before. It was as if the universe had rearranged its constellations, creating new patterns of light where before there was only darkness. After lunch, as Lillian showed Caroline the back garden, Taylor stayed behind, watching them through the kitchen window. There was a song taking shape in his mind, not about shooting stars or ephemeral desires, but about steady stars in the sky, constant points of light that guide us home when we're lost. 3 weeks later, Taylor's benefit concert sold out within minutes. The event, titled Silent Stars, brought together artists from a variety of musical genres to raise awareness about domestic violence and raise funds for victim support organizations. Backstage, moments before taking the stage, Taylor found herself surrounded by her team, finalizing the last details. Caroline was among them, now part of the creative team, working on the visuals of the event with a growing confidence that was inspiring to behold. "Are you ready?" Rachel asked, handing Taylor her guitar. Taylor nodded, adjusting the microphone to his blouse. More than ever. As she walked onto the stage, darkness giving way to a single beam of light that followed her, Taylor felt a clarity that transcended the usual pre-show jitters. Tonight wasn't just about music, it was about using your voice for those who hadn't yet found their own. "Good evening," she greeted the audience, who responded with deafening applause. "Before we get started, I want to share something with you." The crowd gradually fell silent, attention focused on the stage. "A few months ago, I walked into an ordinary coffee shop on an average day, looking for just a few quiet moments. What I found changed my life forever." She paused, letting the words settle. "I met a little girl brave enough to ask for help when everyone around her had failed. And through it, I learned that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin with the simplest gestures. An attentive look, an ear willing to listen, the courage not to look away when we see someone in difficulty." The audience was in absolute silence now, absorbing every word. Tonight is dedicated to all the silent stars, those people who, even though they are going through their own storms, find the strength to shine and guide others. To children like Lillian, who find courage when we need it most. To women like Caroline, who never stop trying, even when the world seems to conspire against them. Taylor adjusted his guitar, gently strumming the first chords of a song that no one in the audience had heard before. This is a new song. It's called Between Stars and Whispers, and it is for all those who have ever needed an outstretched hand, and for those who have had the courage to extend it. The first notes floated through the air, clear and crystalline. Taylor's voice, as she began to sing, carried a palpable emotion that resonated through the auditorium. "It was not on the illuminated stages, nor under applause that I learned the truth. It was in the eyes of a child, with a worn-out doll, in the whisper that changed our destinies." In the front row, sitting between Rachel and a social worker who had become friends, Lillian watched with wide eyes of admiration, her star doll clutched tightly to her chest. Beside him, Caroline smiled through silent tears, her arm protectively around her daughter's shoulders. And as the song built its chorus, a message of hope and resistance, of light found in the most unexpected places, a simple truth resonated through the theater. Sometimes our greatest music isn't the one we play for millions, but the one we make in the small moments of human connection, when we choose to see beyond ourselves and make a difference in someone's world. For in the end, we are all stars in the constellation of life, able to shine alone but infinitely more beautiful when we shine together, guiding each other through the darkness until we find our way home.